Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Dr. Hyena. Welcome back to another video. Now, today we'll be discussing, kind of. I know I've made quite a few videos on this, but kind of the situation with Wild Savannah and the recode. Um, I say I've made a few videos on it. I certainly have. I've made more than a few, but recently there's been obviously a big announcement of sorts, and not necessarily the best one, if I'm being completely honest. However, can't say it was completely unexpected. I kind of saw it coming for years, really. Um, I don't know if I ever voiced that opinion publicly, but if not, then I am now. But yeah, I kind of saw this coming. Obviously, Wild Savannah's been, discontinued. Uh there there'll still be the initial like recode update and then plus some like new animations and reskins if I'm not mistaken is what was said. But after that, that's pretty much it for Wild Savannah as a whole. Um and again, I'm not super surprised, but it is still a little bit sad and I would like to talk about it. So that's what we're gonna be doing here. All right. So I guess just like one of the last videos I made on this, I'll start with a little story. So I joined Roblox in 2017, and I joined because my friends in real life were playing it a lot. I was in middle school at the time. Everybody and their, best friend had Roblox. And so I was like, hey, might as well give it a shot. And I know there's some cool animal games on there. Now, for some context with that, I definitely grew up playing a lot of those gluten-free games on mobile devices, like your Ultimate Lion Simulator, Ultimate Jungle Simulator, Ultimate Savannah Simulator, all those games. I think the first one I actually played was Cheetah Simulator, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Um, back when I was in like fourth grade, so long ago. Um, and I was like, okay, what if there was a multiplayer version of this on Roblox, which I heard that there was. And I was like, okay, cool, let's try it out. So at the time, I thought it was called Wild Africa, but apparently just a little bit earlier that year, the name changed to Wild Savannah. So that was actually the first game that I ever played on Roblox. And, of course, I absolutely loved it. Um, obviously I was very immature back then. I was like 13 years old, so obviously not the brightest in a lot of ways. Um, but I still enjoyed the experience. I made so many friends over the years playing Wild Savannah, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So, what I really fell in love with even more in terms of Wild Savannah wasn't the main game itself. Now, the main game was, good at the time, but it had a lot of problems. And I didn't notice those problems in the testing places in 2018. In fact, I would say that was the year that I saw the most innovation out of, Ludi working on the game. Huge shout out to him, obviously. I mean, this video is basically about him, and it's basically a big thank you letter to him. So yeah, yeah. I mean, the new stuff with like the pouncing at the time, the lion combat a little later on, that was all just like so new, and no other game on or off Roblox had really done that with animals. Or just at all, really. I don't know how you would do it with anything else, but these sort of complex like interactions and mechanics were just so interesting to kind of watch. Um, and experience of course too, right? Like it was that's what I loved about it so much. It was just so fully dynamic and so different from some of the other games I had played like earlier on in my childhood. um and like yeah, I really was looking forward to things back then, and that was still kind of the case in like 2019, but in 2020, I think in 2019, I'll be honest, it like drops down quite a bit. Like I kind of noticed things were being worked on for sure, but as far as what was being released and playable like publicly or semi-publicly, if you want to count the testing places, then yeah, obviously it slowed down quite a bit. But when it came around to 2020, we were all kind of just like at our homes, and the main thing to do was indeed, play video games. And granted, I also got back into like modeling in Blender, which I initially learned in like late 2016, early 2017. I was real young, but I was just kind of experimenting back then. And it also gave me a good chance to get back into like traditional art and whatnot. And, it was just a great time in my life. And something that made it even greater was the fact that I had started making videos on Wild Savannah towards the end of 2019. And I really got into it in 2020, along with those other hobbies. And, well, some of those hobbies have now become a career for me, in fact, which is just insane to say. And that's when, I kind of, again, got into making videos and I realized, oh, yeah, this can really grow into something. So, I kept at it. I I loved every second of it, pretty much. Like even the more drawn out like wars and conflicts we would have between the hyenas and lions over Pride Rock, Split Rock, Pointed Rock, all that jazz. It was just so much fun, just looking back, I was so invested in all of it. Some of those wars would go on for like hours or even days sometimes. Like, I would like just hop on between like classes while I was on like Microsoft Teams or whatever, and my teachers weren't asking me to screen share. So I was like, yeah, let's do it, as long as it wasn't something I had to be like watching the screen for. Um, I would just be playing like Wild Savannah or like Minecraft Bed Wars on the side. And it was just such a blast, Again, I was so invested at the time. However, I also wasn't completely blind, and I did realize, even though what we had was great to, kind of play in the meantime, everyone was kind of waiting for I believe at the time it was going to be called the combat update, which would bring, more complex mechanics like trample damage and more dynamic like fighting, kind of like what was in those like random game slots in 2018 and pouncing too. um but obviously, that never happened, right? There's no way around it. That just straight up never happened. Some of that stuff, may or may not be coming in the recode. We don't really know at this point, if I'm being honest. Um, but yeah, yeah, a lot of good memories from around, 2020 to like okay, I was gonna say 2020 to early 2021. It was really mostly just 2020 now that I think of it. And then obviously like kind of the peak was in 2018. But yeah, after, 2020, um, like in 2021 especially, I noticed, things had very much declined even more. Um, and then I think in 2022 was when, people started referring to it as the recode. Um, just kind of as Ludi started showing more things, right? Just like on his channel or in like some group chats or whatever else. You know, that was kind of how that was. And I don't even think Ludi really called it the recode himself at first. It was kind of a thing that the fans plus I believe Ender Shadow kind of came up with, but that is essentially what it is, so I'm okay with it. um but yeah, it was kind of the same a thing that was planned since like late 2018, So what Ludi was going to do back then was essentially remodel all the animals in that version of Wild Savannah in Blender. And granted that was before mesh deformation was even announced, but he was just going to have them, split up into little parts or whatever, but like with Blender meshes and realistic textures and whatnot. I believe there was a game at the time that influenced him called like Shard Seekers by uh I never played it, so I might be butchering this, but I think Tomardi was a developer of that game. I'm not super familiar with that game or the dev, but I'm just aware that they existed and that Ludi took some inspiration from them. So yeah, that was a thing. Unfortunately, well, it wasn't. That never quite happened. Ludi did start working towards that with the elephant back in like late 2018, but again, turn the clock forward to, I believe we were discussing like 2022, and that elephant is in the testing area, but not a whole lot had really been done with it aside from like animations. Like, that elephant never really got much in terms of like combat other than a very basic attack, and that was again late 2022 or like maybe mid. But the point being, I could kind of see progress was very slow. um and then it got not necessarily worse. It actually arguably picked up a little in 2023. And that's also when I made a video kind of discussing, again, the sort of history of Wild Savannah up to that point and, my opinions on the game. As far as what I had played, I'm not going to comment on Wild Africa because I can't comment on it. That's not my experience. But, in terms of what I'd played, I kind of voiced my sort of opinions there. And towards the end, kind of my concerns about the current, or at the time, current state of the game. And, you know, surprise, surprise, it's 2026. I was going to say 2025. It's not, it's 2026. So 3 years later, and pretty much all those concerns are, still valid. Um, some of the stuff that I was trying to be a little more optimistic about, um, some of that is still there. We are still eventually going to be getting this sort of recode update, but it'll be, more or less the last thing added to the game, right? And just like what I said, last year or the year before, probably both if I'm being honest, I wouldn't hold my breath for it. Um, this isn't anything, again, I can't stop saying this throughout this video. This isn't anything against Ludi in any way whatsoever, but, I wouldn't be that surprised if even just this update got, like, canceled or, like, it's released sort of half-baked, if that makes any sense. Um, as far as I'm concerned, if you want my opinion as a beta tester, I would say it's still a good, like, even if they're not adding any new animals necessarily, I'd still think it's like a good year and a half, 2 years out, if even that. Although I say that, I've said that basically every year, haven't I? So it's pretty hard to even get a gauge of that. And, obviously Ludi has a life, Ender has a life, Mimi has a life. Please do not go after these people. That is not even close to the point of this video. Again, this is more than anything a huge thank you letter to Ludicrous Cutting Fox and even Ender and Mimi, just everyone who's been involved with Wild Savannah. Um, and it's just so interesting to see you know how the game has progressed in a lot of ways and obviously slowed down in others. um but I think there is a lesson to be learned here, and that lesson is very similar to the video I made in like late 2024. you know you can support a community, you can support a creator, you can support developers, so on and so forth, um, without having to necessarily put all these like pressures and weights and expectations on them. Um, and something that Ender said that really resonated with me while I was kind of discussing, just a few minutes ago, the different states of the game, so to speak, that I noticed, was that Ludi had apparently lost motivation ever since like 2019, and just looking back, that certainly checks out, right? There's really no denying it in any particular way. Um, Roblox definitely, Roblox themselves definitely had some very exciting updates, around like 2020 with like the introduction of mesh deformation, but even that has been fairly like unsupported in terms of like just being followed up with. Like there hasn't been a whole lot of that, We still don't have official support for mesh ragdolls. It's just something that you have to make up on your own, and it's super difficult to do. If anyone was wondering why there's none in like Eternal Enemies or Mosaic Survival or Wrath of Nature, that's why. It's because Roblox does not have support for that to this day. Um and to go back to the point that I was making about Wild Savannah, and the lesson to be learned, it's that again, you can support these communities, these developers, these games, so on and so forth, um, without having to put again pressure and weight and expectations on them, because that can be just such a huge motivation sink, not only for them but also for you. Just as a player, as a person, just like these developers, you gotta have a life, um, you gotta have something to do and to look forward to, um, on your own, whether that's your own projects or certain things you want to do in real life, clubs you want to join if you're in like college or high school, or even after that, you can still do those things, sometimes volunteer work, all that stuff. Life is, just full of things that you can do. And if I'm being completely honest, I definitely fell into this sort of trap where the only thing I could think of for so long was just wild savannah and the again all the different phases that this like big update or recode or whatever the heck you want to call it has been through, um and just kind of anticipating that, you know and in no way am I saying I'm like disappointed at all. I'm extremely proud of Ludi and all the work that he's done, but ultimately there's other things to do in life, um, and so I think holding your breath, waiting for a recode, a new game entirely, even sometimes it's just not really worth it. It's nice to again support developers, keep it at the back of your mind, but if it becomes, too much of an obsession of sorts, that's where you do have to kind of take a closer look at yourself and like what you're doing and just be like, hey, maybe that's where we gotta like cut this off. um we gotta like focus on other things. So yeah, yeah, that's part of what I've had to say for this video. I guess that's all for this video, but I could go on for hours really, as I'm sure you all could tell. Excuse me, I've got years of, sort of experiences. If you guys ever want to hear any particular stories, be sure to let me know. I'm always happy to have these sort of discussion videos, and you guys do seem to like them quite a lot. So, yeah, yeah, I think I do have a lot to offer in terms of that. Just a very interesting sort of perspective as both a game dev myself and someone who's been in the wild savannah community as a player for as long as I have. um but to end this video, you know for the final time, I want to say, Ludi, thank you so much for everything you've done over the years. Thank you so much for being such a big inspiration for myself, and I'm sure at least some other developers have certainly been inspired by your work as well. A lot of us wouldn't be where we are today without you, and again, I really do think I speak on behalf of multiple other developers, but even if it's just me, man, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And And yeah, best of luck with, whatever it is that your focus has shifted to. Same thing for you guys like Mimi, Ender, and, anyone else who's been involved. It's been, just such an amazing journey. Met so many, awesome people in the community and, in other communities that have been like partnered with Wild Savannah. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. So till then, take care, peace out, and goodbye. Goodbye everybody.